from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Tonight, President Trump hits the road. Minutes away now from the president's rally in Pennsylvania, aimed at selling the American people on the economy as affordability remains a top issue heading into 2026. We'll get reaction ahead from both sides of the aisle when we talk with Congressman Dan Goldman and Mark Alford up ahead. Plus, an exclusive tonight, behind-the-scenes reporting on what led the president to approve the sale of NVIDIA H200 chips to China following weeks of deliberations. And SpaceX moving ahead with plans for an IPO that could raise more than $30 billion. The exclusive details when Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow joins us. Also tonight, the president's threat against Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, saying his days are numbered. What else Trump is saying about the potential for boots on the ground amid reports now the administration is building plans for a post-Maduro Venezuela. That's all up ahead. And almost 1 month since the longest government shutdown in history ended, a vote on health care is almost here. What Senate Majority Leader John Thune says will hit the Senate floor later this week, and how it could impact millions of Americans' health care coverage when we speak with Minnesota Senator Tina Smith. That's all up ahead. But we begin this evening with the president now just about an hour away from addressing the public in Pennsylvania on the issue that has hung over Trump's second term and could make or break next year's midterms. That, of course, affordability. The president road testing claims that he's tackling America's cost of living woes with a campaign-style rally in the key swing state. The latest Harvard-Harris poll showing 57%, I should say, believe Trump is losing the battle against inflation. 43% believing that he is winning. Now, while voters are evenly split here, saying the economy is better today than during Biden's term. So the question is, can the president turn the public around tonight? Joining us now with the latest here in our Washington bureau is Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson. And Wendy, this is starting to feel a bit familiar. Not only Pennsylvania, but the issue of affordability and data competing with what the message is coming from the White House here. This is almost out of the Joe Biden playbook.
It is so out of the Joe Biden playbook, and a playbook that I think the Biden administration would have never liked to have dealt with and certainly wouldn't have liked to see repeated. I mean, the Biden administration Biden lost the election in Harris largely because they kept telling Americans everything was fine, the economy was strong, and Americans could see that it wasn't. And now we have the president doing the same thing, this president calling it a hoax, a con job, and all of this, and he is being dragged by his staff to a competitive House district where he is going to be forced to acknowledge that it is not a hoax, it is something real, and present a plan to fix it.
Yeah, okay. So what will the message be? Because until recently, the president has been suggesting that affordability as a term and an issue is a Democrat con job or hoax, as he likes to say.
Well, here are the talking points that the White House has sent out to reporters ahead of the speech. It is very traditional. It is full of facts and figures, how much gasoline has gone down, how much inflation has slowed, how much all these things have happened. And they are sort of incremental. But the hope of the Trump White House staff is that he actually addresses all of this tonight. And the chances of him doing that, I wouldn't bet the ranch that he's going to go through facts and figures, because he's going to get up in front of that crowd where people were waiting out in the cold and now we're sitting in this forum of whatever building that is. And he's going to see them getting bored as he starts talking about inflation and, facts and figures, and he's going to go off. I mean, this is the playbook we've come used to. He is very rarely disciplined. He is very rarely on message that the staff wants to do, where other presidents, lean right into it and stick to the script and trust their staff. He is a president who manages by his own whim.
Right.
If he does it tonight, that could turn around the fortunes for the Republicans in the midterm.
Well, we're going to find out together, Wendy. Thank you so much. Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson, our senior editor, with us here in Washington. Joining us now with more is Democratic Congressman Dan Goldman of New York, a member of both the House Homeland Security Committee and the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman, it's good to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. What is your thought on this when the president says affordability is a Democrat con job? Are you part of that con?
It's absurd. It's one thing for the president to try to gaslight the American people about the immigrants that they're deporting, who are almost all nonviolent, non-criminals, or some bogus accusation about the Department of Justice or whatever. But you can't lie to people about their pocketbooks. People are feeling it every week, every month. They have to make ends meet. And this president is making it so much more difficult for the vast majority of Americans to do that. So he can try to gaslight them by calling it a hoax, calling it a con job, but the money is coming out of their own wallets. So I don't know how he's going to do that. And the reality is that this economy is going in the wrong direction, and that the president has betrayed so many of his campaign promises.
You're up with a new tax on the wealthiest Americans. I think the name of it here, I just want to get this right, is the Wealth Inequity Bill. Where would that tax kick in? And would that actually help to make the difference in what a lot of people describe as a K-shaped economy?
Yeah, so this is called the Robin Hood Act, which is designed to put an excise tax on loans that are taken out against assets. Stocks and other similar assets. And the idea here is to tackle this massive wealth inequality by targeting the people who are not paying their fair share. Jeff Bezos pays a 1% effective tax rate. Elon Musk pays a 3% effective tax rate. So the reason they do that, I should say, is because they take loans out against their Tesla stock or their SpaceX stock or their Amazon stock. They don't pay tax on those loans. The assets appreciate. When they die, they then go to the next generation with a stepped-up basis: buy, borrow, die. That is why we have so much wealth inequality, because if you have assets, your wealth has skyrocketed. If you are a wage earner, your wealth has, on a relative basis, gone down. This bill targets that loophole and makes sure that these billionaires are going to pay their fair share of taxes, that can pay for universal child care, can pay for universal pre-K for 4-year-olds, can pay for lowering the prices of so many things that Americans struggle with.
This hits individuals making more than $400,000 a year, joint filers at more than $450,000. So you'd be putting a tax on yourself here, right?
I would, yes. And those thresholds are really just what your income is and for when you were to take out these loans. And I think a lot of the details will be hashed out in committee, but the point here is that this is a $300 billion tax avoidance scheme over 10 years. It's a tremendous amount of revenue, and rather than use a complicated system like a wealth tax or even dabble with marginal tax rates, income tax rates, salary earners, wage earners pay plenty of taxes, especially in New York. This targets very specifically a narrow band of people who are super wealthy and who avoid paying tax because their wealth is not based on their income.
President Trump was asked in an interview with Politico how he would rate his own economy. He said A++++++. 5 pluses. How would you grade it?
I rated an F. I think it's been absolutely abominable. Yeah, the tariffs have been terrible for the American people. Prices are going up. Inflation continues to go up. The haves are getting wealthier. There's massive corruption where Donald Trump is reaping the profits from his own official position. And billionaires are free to pursue AI or crypto with no regulation. There is no enforcement. If you are a wealthy buddy of Donald Trump, you are doing great. For the other 99% of Americans, things are a lot worse than they were a year ago.
Just to keep everyone honest here, how would you have graded Joe Biden's economy when he was leaving office?
That's a good question. It was certainly not an A+++++.
Fair enough. I want to ask you, based on your position on the Homeland Security Committee, Congressman, about what's going on in the waters off of Venezuela. It's not just the double tap strike. It's the entire operation as a whole that people are asking about, and what the aim is here, if it's anything less than regime change. In an exclusive sit-down with Politico that I already referred to, he spoke with Dasha Burns. The president was asked about the recent moves on Venezuela. I want you to hear this exchange and get your reaction. Let's listen.
So how far would you go to take Maduro out of office?
I don't want to say that,
But you want to see him out?
His days are numbered.
Can you rule out an American ground invasion?
I don't want to rule in or out. I don't talk about it.
Would you like to have heard the president rule out boots on the ground?
Well, given how much he has ruled that out as a general policy matter, given how much he has talked about regime change as not being the right pathway toward foreign policy, I question why in this particular case that he believes that that's appropriate. I think the legal basis for his attacks on the boats is very dubious. And he is picking a battle that does not seem to be one that is necessary or one that the American people are really, really concerned about. I would much rather that he spend his time either focusing on the economy or helping Ukraine, a democratic ally, facing off against a dictatorship that has invaded its independent sovereign territory. That's where his efforts, to the extent that they are focused overseas, should be directed. Yes, we certainly have an issue with cartels, but blowing up boats, smaller boats on the, some seemingly randomly off the coast is not something that I think any American, or most Americans, I should say, really think is where our focus should be.
Yeah. Congressman, some news today that looks like it's going to hit close to home for you. City Controller Brad Lander is expected to announce a campaign tomorrow to challenge you, likely with the endorsement, we understand, of the mayor-elect. What would be your message to Mr. Lander?
Well, right now, I'm laser focused on the job that we have to do here in Washington and in New York City. My constituents are suffering from rising healthcare prices, from food insecurity, and many from the terror that the ICE and immigration enforcement officers are wreaking on not only immigrant communities, but communities all throughout the city. And that's where my attention is lying. I am trying to figure out ways to navigate a Congress down here that is dysfunctional, but that we can use our position and our power to help protect the constituents that I serve. There'll be plenty of time, I'm sure, for politics next year, whether it's against Brad or anyone else. But right now, I'm focused on doing my job.
You don't sound worried. Are you guys friends, Congressman?
We have worked together in the past on a number of different issues, and so I certainly don't have any ill will towards him, but we'll see. Sure. We'll see what happens. But I'm proud to be putting my record on the line here in Congress over my 3 years.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of my record. I'm proud of the work that I've done standing up for democracy, standing up against a rogue administration that is trying to take down the government that is the foundation of this country. And I have a lot of experience doing that, going up against Donald Trump, leading the first impeachment investigation, and I've been using that creatively and aggressively in my 3 years, and I look forward to continuing to do that.
Well, I appreciate your answering that question. Maybe we'll see you in the next meeting of the Bagel Caucus, Congressman. That's Dan Goldman, the Democrat from New York. We appreciate the time, as always, on Bloomberg. Now, we're less than 24 hours away from the Federal Reserve's final interest rate decision of the year. Time for the big windup. President Trump's Fed chair frontrunner Kevin Hassett detailed what he would do regarding rate cuts during an event with the Wall Street Journal earlier today. Listen.
If the data suggests that we could do it, then like right now, I think there's plenty of room to do it.
Plenty of room, which plenty is more than 25 points.
Correct.
Okay.
This comes now as the Financial Times reports the president will be kicking off his final round of Fed chair interviews this week for A look at how the markets moved today as traders await the Fed decision. We turn to power moves with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, who's live at World Headquarters in New York. We all holding our breath here, Romaine?
Everyone's holding their breath, and it's kind of fitting that you actually led with that quote by Kevin Hassett, because this is a market that is much less focused right now, Joe, on Jay Powell than they are on his likely successor. And that's a big part of the reason why you've seen the holding pattern, not only in stocks, but also the rise that we've seen in bond yields over the last couple of weeks. This idea here that the market is looking past the rate cut that pretty much everyone thinks we're going to get tomorrow, and really looking over the next 5 months or so, from now basically to mid-May, when Jay Powell's term finally runs out, and the idea that he might be a bit of a lame duck. So instead of trying to read the tea leaves of what Jay Powell might do, maybe you want to read the tea leaves of what I guess a Kevin Hassett might do, or maybe a Kevin Warsh. At some point, I guess we'll find out the real answer to that, Joe. But it gets to this idea right now that we're heading into the meeting tomorrow with almost unprecedented conditions: a rise in yields, stasis in equity prices, and expectations right now, Joe, that we're going to get 3 dissents at this meeting. And just to put that into context, Bloomberg Economics crunched these numbers. Over the past 3 meetings, we've had 5 dissents. The 3 dissents that we're likely to get tomorrow, that would take it to 8 over 4 meetings. You'd have to go back 47 meetings to get the same number of dissents than the ones that we basically are going to get over the last 4 meetings. And that is really illustrative right now, Joe, of just why the market is in a holding pattern around what happens tomorrow.
Of course, we'll have special Fed coverage tomorrow starting 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Good to see you, Romaine. Thank you. Romaine Bostick live in New York on Balance of Power. Coming up, we'll turn our attention back to Capitol Hill and what's on lawmakers' agenda for the rest of the year, beginning with health care when we speak with Republican Congressman Mark Alford of Missouri. He's up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The Trump Republican economy is not an A+. Everyday Americans are not confused about that. And if there's any debate as to the success or failure of this economy related to how it may be graded, the only question is whether the American people would give it a D for disaster or an F for failure.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. That was House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries speaking to reporters earlier today following comments President Trump made in his interview with Politico, in which he touted his administration's progress on affordability, giving it a grade of A+++++. I think there were 5 there. Now, this comes as the president leaves the bubble. He's just minutes away from taking the stage in Pennsylvania to tout his economic accomplishments at a campaign-style event set to start about an hour from now. Joining us right now with his reaction to all of this, live from Capitol Hill, including the work that has to be done there, Republican Congressman Mark Alford of Missouri is a member of both the House Small Business Committee and the House Appropriations Committee. And Congressman, it's good to see you. Welcome back. I'd love to hear your thoughts on affordability and the message that we're going to hear from the president. But I just want to be fair. Before you were with us, Congressman Dan Goldman was here. He rated Donald Trump's economy an F. And I asked him to rate Joe Biden's economy. He wasn't sure. He said it wouldn't be an A++++. How would you rate this economy that we're in right now? Because, well, we keep hearing from a lot of people who are feeling the pinch of prices, and I'm sure you're hearing that too.
Well, look, I am. Look, I hate to say I feel your pain, like President Clinton made famous or infamous. But look, I realize the struggle that the American people are having, right? When President Trump said that it's an A+++, Donald J. Trump is an eternal optimist. He knows what's coming down the road, and so do we. Look, we passed the One Big Beautiful Bill, the Working Families Tax Cuts Act. That's going to mean tremendous benefits for families in the first and second quarter. We're not there yet, Joe. We're kind of like a bow and arrow. We are pulling back the arrow. We're about right here, but come the first quarter, we're going to let that arrow go. It's going to take off. We're going to have benefits for families in the child tax credits. We're going to have immediate expensing for businesses. That means they can put up new buildings, buy new equipment, and write it off immediately. This is going to be a boon for our economy. It's just going to take a little bit of time, but I am confident that we will be in the A-plus territory come first quarter.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting because you sound a lot like J.D. Vance. You also sound a lot like Scott Bessent. That's been their message that, you know what, little patience. We're trying to do something here, and it's going to take a little bit of time. Is that what the president should say tonight instead of telling people that affordability is a con job?
Yeah. Say that again.
Is that what the president should say tonight in Pennsylvania, as opposed to calling it a Democrat con job? Why not just be straight with people and say, I need your patience, we're going to take you down the road, and it's going to get better? Yeah.
Look, you know what? I used to be on the news before this. I got in Congress, and I would try to explain what the president was saying. I've read The Art of the Deal. I do get what the president's saying. Number one, he's an eternal optimist. He wants the American people to feel confidence, bring hope back to America. And that's what we're doing with our policies, both from the White House and here in Congress. We're working right now on a plan that's going to replace, I think, Obamacare to some degree, these subsidies that we've been talking about, these COVID-era subsidies. Our leaders are working on it right now. We're going to have a vote on this very soon. We are turning things around in America to truly make America great again.
Well, interesting. What are you hearing then? Take us into your state and on the ground. What are you hearing from farmers? Because the president was talking yesterday about the pain that they're feeling right now, and he's unlocked $11-12 billion in a farmer bailout, which I know is good news in the short term, but more might be needed. Do they share the president's optimism or yours?
For the most part, they do. I did 15 town hall stops this past August. I heard from some farmers who were quite upset, but that was before that President Trump won really this tariff deal with China and got them to agree with his negotiations with Xi to buy our soybeans. I know that our farmers are hurting, but here's why. It's because of President Biden and the pressures that he put on our farmers, the high input costs because of his war on fossil fuels. Fertilizer went through the roof. Diesel went through the roof. Our farmers are not able to make a living. And that's why it's very important that we keep our farmers in business, because we not just feed Missouri, not just feed the United States of America, but the world. And so this package that the president's delivering through the Commodity Credit Corporation is going to help the farmers get the loans they need from Farm Credit and from the banks so that they can buy their seed and their fertilizer to keep going this next year. We have, in the state of Missouri alone, we had 95,000 farms when I started this job 3 years ago. We're down to 87,000. We're losing 1,000 farms a month in America. We have to make sure that our farmers survive, because our food security is national security.
I hate to do this to you, but you're a broadcaster. We've got only about a minute left, Congressman. I want to ask you about health care reform, because we've got a bill that's going to get a vote in the Senate on Thursday. This is the Cassidy-Crapo bill, $1,500 in personal health savings account rather than extending the Obamacare subsidies. Would you vote for a bill like that if it got to the House?
I've got to read it in more detail. A couple of things we have to make sure that we do. Transparency in our pricing. We've got to make sure the money goes to the individual, the family that's struggling at home, rather than the insurance companies, which have gotten rich off of a failing Obamacare system. And we've got to make sure that it's a lasting, sustainable system. We can do that. Meaningful reform. This is our one and only chance. We've got to make it happen, and we will.
That was well done. 30 seconds. Republican Congressman Mark Alford of Missouri. It's good to see you. Let's keep the conversation going, Congressman. Thanks for being here on Bloomberg. Coming up, the exclusive reporting on the president's decision to allow the sale of H-200 ships to China, and the latest on a SpaceX IPO. It's getting bigger. Later, the Senate set to vote on that bill I mentioned. Democrat and Republican versions. We'll talk with Senator Tina Smith later, right here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We're learning more about SpaceX's plans to go public. as the company moves ahead with plans now for an IPO that would seek to raise significantly more than $30 billion, according to people familiar with the matter. The Elon Musk-led company is targeting an historic valuation of about $1.5 trillion. For more details here, we turn to Ed Ludlow, host of Bloomberg Tech, who joins us live from our San Francisco bureau. What else can you tell us here, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, the rationale on why they need to raise so much money is very interesting. Speaking to sources, while SpaceX doesn't have any sort of immediate capital needs, going after raising more than $30 billion is because they've identified this kind of new area and goal, which is to build constellation or space-based data center capacity. So right now, the majority of SpaceX's revenue is from Starlink, a constellation of satellites that beams internet connectivity down to Earth. But they know that if they want to move into this newer domain, alongside all of SpaceX's other goals, the new domain being space-based data center, it's incredibly capital intensive. Tens of billions of dollars, because you need to buy the AI chips that then go into that space-based data center. So what I'm hearing is that this is very much on track. The target is mid-2026 for the IPO. The valuation of $1.5 trillion is a consequence of where the pricing lands and their target raise, right? That's math, basically. But, you know, the interesting thing on the $30 billion figure as well, and my understanding is it will be north of $30 billion, is Saudi Aramco raised $29.4 billion in 2019. That was the most ever in history for a raise at IPO levels. So this is very closely followed.
Incredible. I can only imagine how oversubscribed this will be, and I know we'll talk about it a lot more as we get closer. And I'd like to ask you again about NVIDIA, with important news over the last 24 hours. As we've been discussing, the White House is set to clear the sale of these H200 chips to China. But there are questions here in Washington about whether this is the right thing to do and whether China even is going to want them. I spoke earlier with Senator Pete Ricketts, a Republican, who's the R on a bill called the Safe Chips Act that would essentially codify into law the export controls currently in place by the Trump administration. He seemed really skeptical about this when I talked to him today. Let's listen to what he said.
I think that we should slow down any high-end AI chips from going to communist China. And frankly, I think that just, again, I think that helps us actually supplement what we want to do with regard to dominating the AI tech stack with American technology outside of communist China.
Ed, I don't know if that legislation stands a chance, but I also don't know if it's going to matter. Is Beijing going to even allow the sale of H200s? Where's this going?
Yeah, the official state of play is that the White House has authorized NVIDIA to sell the H200 generation to China. We don't know if China will sort of react with some kind of counter policy that mandates state-backed enterprise in particular, or state-backed technology companies, give preferential selection of domestic chips. I spoke to a source, and the calculus was this. The president was essentially given a range of options. Either we just don't export any technology at all, right, and cut access off, but the risk is that Huawei, the domestic champion, fills that vacuum. And at the other end, send the latest technology, flood China with American technology, the absolute latest, so that America's technology is the mainstay, but then there are national security concerns. So where they landed is the middle. Allow them to do H200, which is about 18 months behind NVIDIA's latest generation Blackwell. But what the source told me is very interesting. Based on what China can do, the White House, and this was discussed with the president, as I understand it, said to the president, if you look at Huawei's latest Ascend 910C chips, like for like, they are not as good as NVIDIA's Blackwell chips. But if they are in aggregate, as a rack, as a cluster, many chips in combination, the magic of what Huawei's done with its Cloud Matrix 384 is that they can get performance levels from that cluster of chips in aggregate that's as good as Blackwell-based systems. In other words, they found a way, even at the chip level if they're not as good, to get performance out of it. That was relayed to the president, and that informed the decision they made today. At least that's what we've reported here at Bloomberg.
Fascinating, fascinating story. Ed Ludlow, thank you. He's the co-host of Bloomberg Tech, with us live from San Francisco. Thank you, Ed. Back here to Washington, where we're almost 1 month now to the day since the longest government shutdown in American history ended. And we have word on that much-promised health care vote that was crucial to ending the stalemate. Earlier today, Senate Majority Leader John Thune provided this update for the health care bill, the health care vote on Thursday. Listen.
This program desperately needs to be reformed. The Democrats have decided we're not going to do anything to reform it, and so we'll see where the votes are on Thursday. But we will have an alternative that we will put up that reflects the views of the Republicans here in the United States Senate.
Okay, so John Thune deciding on a plan, endorsing the plan by Bill Cassidy and Mike Crapo that would not extend Obamacare subsidies. Rather, it would create these health savings accounts and would enroll or allow people to enroll themselves into the bronze health care package here. There's a competing Democratic plan as well that would extend Obamacare subsidies and avoid the so-called cliff. Let's get into this with Democratic Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota. She's a member of both the Senate Banking and Senate Finance Committees. And Senator, it's great to see you. Obviously, you're going to be a fan of the Democratic plan, but we're hearing, Senator, that neither may have the votes to pass the Senate. What then?
Well, I think that's a great question. Come January 1st, Americans that get their health insurance on the exchange are going to be looking at doubling or maybe even tripling of their health insurance premiums. And I'm hearing from Minnesotans that they simply can't afford it. I mean, this is a story that I'm hearing from farmers, for example, in Minnesota, who often buy their health insurance on the exchange. And so we have a very short window to actually address this problem, to extend the tax credits so that folks won't be faced with that massive sticker shock. There's really, at this point, only one thing to do to protect people from that, and that is to extend these credits. And that's what the Democrats are offering. This is what we've been asking Republicans to engage with us on literally for months. It looks just exactly as you say, Joe, that there won't be any Republicans or enough Republicans joining with us to get that done. And I mean, that's the problem we have. Donald Trump doesn't want to see this happen, and as a result, it's not going to happen.
Well, you know, he was asked about this in a pretty wide-ranging interview with Politico. And you know the president would like to kill Obamacare and send, as he says, money directly to people. Let's listen to how he put it.
Will you tell Congress to extend those Obamacare subsidies while you work out another deal?
I don't know. I'm going to have to say, I'd like to get better health care. I'd like to have people buy their own health care, get much better health care. And what I want to do, very simple, I want to give the money to the people, not to the insurance companies.
So that's getting a little bit closer to the Bill Cassidy bill that I already mentioned, Senator. But what would happen if you just started giving money to people? Then they need to give it to the insurance company, correct? I'm sure you've thought this through. So we're all on the phone with an insurance provider trying to arrive at a rate. Wouldn't that in itself potentially raise premiums because we would not be speaking from economies of scale?
You are so right about that. What would happen is that people who are generally healthy and are not worried about what healthcare expenses, what medical expenses they're going to have, are going to exit the insurance market. They're going to look at that health care savings account and say, yep, that's enough for me to pay for my, my preventative care visit or the little amount of healthcare expenses that I'm expecting to have. But then what happens when you get sick? Or what happens if you are sick? What happens if you're faced with a pregnancy, which is going to cost way more than the amount of money that Bill Cassidy would have or the Republicans would have us put into these healthcare savings account, and you're out of luck, and then you take on medical debt, and then the whole system collapses. I mean, I think it's hard for people to understand this, but the health insurance market as we have today, I mean, there's a lot wrong with it, and there's many reforms that we need to make, but pulling healthy people out of the market is just going to put everybody else's costs going through the roof, and it's going to put everybody else at risk. And it's going to be a big problem for rural hospitals. It's going to be a big problem for folks that are trying to figure out how to afford the care that they need.
Do you wish that Democrats had not made this agreement to reopen the government, or maybe even to close the government to begin with, Senator? Would there have been an opportunity? Because I remember the conversation back then. Republicans said that this is a end-of-year issue and government funding is a now issue. We could, of course, argue that health care was a now issue a month ago. Would that have helped?
Well, I think that's exactly right. This people's health insurance premiums skyrocketing is a now issue, and Democrats for months have been saying to Republicans, work with us to figure out a way to stop this big, huge increase from happening. And they basically have said no. You're right. John Thune said, we'll talk about it after we reopen the government. Okay, the government is reopened, and what they are saying is basically we will still refuse to work with us. And, you know, this is like inside Washington politics, which is what is so frustrating to people about how things don't get done to actually help them in their everyday lives. And, I mean, I'm embarrassed to go back to Minnesota and say, yep, we couldn't get enough people to vote with us to make sure that you're not facing catastrophic increases in your health insurance bills. It's just wrong, and I think it's why people get so frustrated with what is happening here. And it's why people are actually, I think, one of the reasons they're turning and don't trust Donald Trump anymore on so many economic issues, because they can see that he's doing nothing to help them afford not only their health insurance, but so much else about their lives right now.
Well, of course, all of this does fall under the banner of affordability, I suppose, and that's why the president has left Washington. You know, he's going to be speaking. In fact, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, speaking right now in Pennsylvania ahead of the president to deliver the message on affordability, which he has called a Democrat con job and a Democrat hoax. There's a live view if you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube with Scott Bessent at the podium. This could be a stem winder by the time the president is speaking, scheduled to take the podium or take the stage around 6 p.m., about 20 minutes from now. Senator, is affordability a Democrat con job?
Well, that is so out of touch with where Americans are right now. Look, I think that a lot of Americans voted for Donald Trump because they were struggling to afford their lives. They couldn't afford the basics, and they thought that he was going to help them. He said on day one, I'm going to lower inflation. I'm going to bring costs under control. And as a practical matter, over this last year, everything that he has done has actually made it worse. His tariffs have increased costs for Americans at the grocery store and at Target and Best Buy. His rolling back of energy policy has made people's utility bills go up. The damage that's been done to the farm economy is really incredible. And we're seeing manufacturing shut down and people losing their jobs. And this is something that just kind of blew my mind when I saw it today. Between Black Friday and Cyber Monday, over $1 billion was taken out by American consumers on buy now, pay later schemes, because they're trying to figure out how to afford the holidays for their family, and they're struggling to do it. So this is not a hoax. This is what is really happening in people's lives. And unfortunately, we're seeing no ideas from the president about what to do about it. And as you say, it's hard to know that he's even taking it seriously.
Well, it's not for me to say, but I will ask you quickly, as a member of the Banking Committee, do you want to see a rate cut tomorrow? We get a quarter point. Is that appropriate?
Well, I am expecting that that is what the Fed is going to do, but they're balancing a lot. And I would say that the declines in employment over the last couple of months, now that our data is catching up, I'm sure is something that they're going to be considering as they look at all of the economic factors in front of them.
Let's talk again when it comes time to pick a new chair. Democratic Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota, thanks so much for being back with us today on Bloomberg. Coming up, a judge now ruling the Justice Department can release the grand jury materials from Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal case. Yeah, we'll bring you those details. And the race for New York governor heating up. We'll discuss the latest challenger to throw their hat in the ring with our political panel. It's up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for being with us. We'll discuss the president's upcoming rally in Pennsylvania when our political panel convenes in just a moment. But first, the stories we're watching in today's Power Brief. Financial advisors are saying President Trump's claim that his Trump accounts could grow to more than $300,000 in 18 years relies on aggressive return assumptions that would require an exceptional run-up in markets year after year. The accounts automatically seeded with $1,000 would require a 13% annual return to reach the mark, while the S&P 500 has delivered an average return of only about 10.4% since the 1920s. The return from 2010 to 2024 did average almost 14%, though experts say that reflects a particularly strong market that early losses could affect outcomes, even if the average return is the same. The Justice Department is now permitted to release grand jury materials from Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal trial in the most recent request since the Epstein Files Transparency Act was signed last month. The deciding judge adding in his decision that any material must be rigorously reviewed for compliance with a section of the act that protects the privacy and identities of victims. Maxwell has not publicly resisted this motion of release, though she has asked the court to note that the information could harm her anticipated request for a new trial. Finally, Bruce Blakeman, Nassau County executive, announcing this morning that he's joining the New York City governor's race, the New York State, I should say. Blakeman touting his record of hiring more police officers, cutting taxes, cooperating with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The announcement video that he posted on X. He'll be challenging Elise Stefanik for the Republican nomination as they both vie to unseat Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul. Joining us now with their reaction to the news today, this evening's political panel, Megan Hayes, our Democratic strategist and former special assistant to President Biden, is with us, alongside Republican strategist Ashley Davis, partner at S3 Group. It's great to see you both. Time to wind up the band again in Pennsylvania. And I'm guessing this is a little bit of deja vu for you. Not only is he going to Pennsylvania, he's going there to talk affordability to an electorate that doesn't feel the story that he's framing. How does he do this differently than Joe Biden did?
Well, 16% of people in Pennsylvania think that are the only ones that think that they're doing better than they were a year ago. So that's some overwhelming, a big hill he has to climb. He needs to have empathy here. He needs to show that he understands their difficulties and their struggles and give them policies that actually work, not tariffs and not bailing out farmers for a problem that he caused or bailing out other countries. So he needs to he needs to have some actual policies and he needs to have action. I don't think that the challenge that he has is it didn't work for Joe Biden and he's facing the same problem. People are tired of it. And so they're just going to keep changing.
Yeah. Does he need to sound more like Scott Bessent or J.D. Vance in asking for people's patience, acknowledging what's happening here? That expression says no to me.
Well, no. Listen, I agree with Megan on this because unless people are sitting around the kitchen table and feel like their grocery prices are cheaper, it doesn't matter what's said, whether you are doing a rally or not. I think that the administration realized after the November elections and the quasi-closeness of the special election. I don't really buy it. I mean, it was kind of close, 9 points.
Okay,
but
Tennessee.
I do think that, listen, we have a bunch of things going into effect in January. We have no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security. We have the beef price initiatives by the Secretary Rollins. Soybeans, obviously, with China has already been placed. However, does that bring the prices down by, I would say, June or July, when people start making their decisions and if they feel better? And so even though the president feels that he's done a lot to bring down inflation and prices, the policies haven't kicked in at our grocery stores to bring them down.
But
interesting.
So that's going to be the issue.
Those prices are going to be overturned by people paying so much more in their health care. And I think that's the other problem here is that you can bring grocery prices down and stuff might come down $1 or $2, but if you're having to pay 20, 30, 40% more in health care, you're not actually feeling any different. So they're not going to actually feel that their grocery prices are lower. And so that's, to Ashley's point, in July or August, when things really start to heat up for the midterms, it's really going to matter what all these costs are coming in.
Gas prices are down.
In certain places.
Well, he points to gas prices. He points to pharmaceuticals with some of the deals that he's made, but I don't think people are feeling those yet.
No, it's different. Listen,
the list that you just gave, though, reminds me of shrinkflation. We're talking to the meat companies about gouging. We're dealing with untangling supply lines, all that kind of biting around the edges.
It goes back to it doesn't matter what Joe Biden said, the economy's good, or Donald Trump says the economy's good. And one thing we cannot do, which I hope at some point, once you're 3 months into an administration, maybe you get up to 6 months, you have to stop blaming the previous.
Well, yeah. So are we going to get that tonight?
He
says this is a Democrat con job and it's Biden's economy that we're taking out.
I'm sure that there's going to be some criticisms of the previous administration. But again, and Republicans control everything right now, so we have to figure out this problem.
I had a conversation earlier, if we can go back to our conversation with Congressman Dan Goldman, Democrat from New York, following President Biden's interview with Politico, in which he was asked to grade his own economy. He said that would be an A++++++. I asked the congressman how he would grade this economy, and we look back to Joe Biden as well. Listen.
I rated an F. I think it's been absolutely abominable. Yeah, the tariffs have been terrible for the American people. Prices are going up. Inflation continues to go up.
Just to keep everyone honest here, how would you have graded Joe Biden's economy when he was leaving office?
That's a good question. It was certainly not an A+++++.
He got all 5 pluses in there. An F, though, really?
That's a good question.
We're not. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
We've got great producers
here.
Thank you. I'll share that with our team. An F. We're not in a recession right now. Is that fair?
It's not unfair. I don't think that there's very many positive things about the economy. I just think that everything seems to be failing, and because Republicans are in charge of everything, you can't give them you can't give them a passing grade. But also, I think that they're just complete ignorance to everything, and their just lack of understanding and denial, I think, adds to a failing grade. So, I don't think he's wrong.
How about you?
Well, I don't think that there was a good economy at the end under Biden, and I don't think, and I think that there's issues with the economy now. I think that but we're not in a recession on either side. The thing that's interesting, I think, with all this, which is important to your viewers as well, is the stock market was doing well under Biden. The stock market's doing, obviously, very well under President Trump. So there is a disconnect between what's happening here and what's happening in everyday lives.
Because less than 70% of the population actually invests in the stock market on their own. They have their retirement accounts, but they're not managing that, so they're not seeing that in their day-to-day lives.
Let's talk about health care. This is going to be a big deal later in the week. And Ashley, I know that you're hearing from a lot of sources in the Senate right now. The president, talking on Air Force One, made a couple of headlines. Love the idea of money going to people, not insurance companies. We've been hearing that a lot. But you know what else he said? He supports the concept of an Obamacare subsidies bill. The one John Thune picked does not. The Cassidy-Crapo bill would create health savings accounts and make this a very different approach. Can that pass?
No. Neither. Okay. Nothing's passing on Thursday.
So we're going over the cliff.
I mean, yes, I'm
not sure. That's too dramatic? That's what we're calling it, right?
I think it is a little dramatic. Listen, this is going to expire. I don't think there's any way either of these bills pass. The Democrat 3-year extension.
Yeah.
These are both, I know Republicans, and I said this earlier today, Republicans couldn't not do anything when the Democrats were at least putting a bill forward. I'm talking about the Senate. Mm-hmm. The House, I know the Speaker said last week that there was going to be a vote potentially next week in the House. That's still a potential, I guess. I just don't know what that looks like and if it would ever pass, and it probably wouldn't pass the Senate. Mm. So coming to the end of the year, the subsidies will expire. Now, there are ways that we've done it, and we've done it before with the subsidies, where you can back pay and have people not lose. But I think the problem is the horse is out of the barn right now, because I can't imagine the insurance companies, which is kind of the big problem here, ever giving the money back in regards to the negotiations. I mean, the federal government can fund it. It's the insurance companies that wouldn't be able to retro.
So the horse is out of the barn, says Ashley Davis. If neither of these pass,
is that a right statement?
We're going with it.
Okay.
What happens at the end of the month? You're going to see premiums go up between between 50 and 400%, depending on what. So people in some cases are just falling off the rolls?
And they're going to lose their insurance, and that is going to negatively impact every single Republican heading into the midterm. Those campaign ads were going to rate themselves. People are going to get sick, people will die, and Republicans are going to get blamed. They say that they do not have they say they do not want Obamacare, but they do not have a solution. Having a health savings plan is not giving people insurance. That does not mean you can go to the hospital and get care and be able to afford the bill. And I think that there is just a huge disconnect here about people need health insurance.
Well, we're going to be talking about this a lot more. That bill would allow people to enroll in the bronze plan, but we'll deal with this when the bill hits the floor. Megan Hayes and Ashley Davis, great panel. Thank you both. And make sure to tune in to our special coverage of the Fed meeting starting at 1:30 p.m. Eastern tomorrow on Bloomberg.